Daniel Kahneman is here. He is a senior scholar and professor of psychology emeritus at Princeton. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for his analysis of decision-making and uncertainty. He is the only non-economist to have won that award. Steven Pinker calls him among the most influential psychologists in history and certainly the most important psychologist alive today. He writes about the ideas that have driven his career over the past 5 decades in a new book. It is called Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm pleased to have Daniel Kahneman here at this table for the first time, and it is about time. So I'm glad you're here.
I'm delighted to be here.
Now, let's give credit where credit should be given to your colleague, the late
Amos Tversky. Amos Tversky.
Yeah.
Yes.
A great friendship.
Yes.
And a great... Tell me about the friendship first.
Well, you know, we were extraordinarily lucky. So this was one of those collaborations that people dream of, and there are very few who are that lucky. We liked each other, so we spent all our days, hours every day, and
doing
talking
what?
about everything. But mostly our subject was the study of intuition, and specifically the study of mistakes of intuition. So what we were doing that was work, that counted as work later, but it was all fun, was to invent problems where we knew the solution, but intuitively we had another idea. And it was that we did for just about
Give me an
as long.
example of that.
Well, okay. An example of that. Here it is. You're trying to predict, assign probabilities to two events.
Right.
And one of these events is a flood somewhere in the United States, killing at least 1,000 people over the next 10 years.
Right.
That's one event. The other event is an earthquake in California causing a flood in which more than 1,000 people will drown sometime within the next 10 years. Now, the second event obviously is less probable than the first. But when you take two groups and you have one group judge the first event, the other group judge the second event, the earthquake event looks much more probable. So that's the kind of, where clearly there is a logical rule. Of course, it couldn't be.
Right.
Yeah, I'll give you another example while we're at it. It's not our research, but very similar. During the time that there was a lot of terrorism in Europe, people were asked about travel insurance. And they were asked, how much would you be willing to pay for an insurance policy that pays $100,000 in case of death for any reason? And others were asked, how much would you be willing to pay for an insurance policy that pays $100,000 in case of death in a terrorist incident? The second policy is worth more than the first. Now, this is absurd. I mean, obviously, dying in a terrorist incident is an event that's included in the event of dying. But what? People are more afraid of dying in a terrorist incident than they're afraid of dying. So that's where the intuition comes from. It comes from the fear. And you have a judgment of probability that is distorted by something else. So those were the kinds of problems.
Now, you would discuss every afternoon at Princeton.
Yeah.
And it is fair to say he would have won the Nobel with you.
Oh, of course.
But they don't give Nobel Prizes to people who are deceased. And I assume his name would have been on this book as well.
Also, well, it's hard to tell because we might not have agreed on this book. This is my book, but the ideas on which it's based and the history of the book are joined.
Is there a connecting dot to all these ideas? Is there a central, immutable fact?
Well, yes, there is. And it's that there are two ways of thinking about the world and thinking about anything. There is what I call thinking fast, the intuitive way, and thinking slow, the reasoning
System
way.
1 and System 2.
System 1 and System 2. And that, we didn't have those terms, but we had that idea that here are problems where we can figure out the solution, but our intuitions, fast thinking, as I would now call it, goes the other way. So that really was a theme of our research, both on judgment, which we studied for many years, and on decision-making, to which we moved afterwards.
Explain System 1 and System 2.
Well, there are two kinds of thinking, first of all, really, and everybody can recognize them, because one is what happens to you when I say 2 plus 2,
right.
And, something comes to your mind. When I say capital of France, something comes to your mind. This is associative memory working. It's working automatically. You don't have to decide it. It's something that happens to you. It's just like seeing that somebody's hair is dark.
Now, is that part of your unconscious mind?
Well, you're not really conscious of how it is happening. Right. You are conscious of the results. Right. You're conscious of your impressions, but you're not aware at all of the workings of associative memory. So that's System 1. And System 2 has two functions. One of them is, to compute things like 24 times 17. Now, nothing came to mind immediately. You have to work at it laboriously if you're going to do it at all. And another function of System 2 is to supervise the mind and to supervise behavior. And that is work, that function. The function of control, the function of... so System 2, what characterizes System 2 is that it's effortful. And we invest effort, and we have a sense of agency when System 2 is involved. We have a sense that this is our thing. This is something that I do. It is not something that is happening to me. So that's the
Now, is it important to
thing.
know when System 1 is appropriate and when System 2 is appropriate?
Oh, yeah. It's very important to know, because many mistakes are, most of the time we run on System 1.
Right.
I mean, if System 1 is the software, most of the time we work,
When we see the light turn green, we walk.
Yes, and it's not only that. Even when we're exchanging pleasantries with a colleague at work, we're not working very hard.
Right, right.
So most of the time it's System 1. And most of the time, System 1 works just fine, because we have a lot of practice at what we do. We're very good at what we do. Occasionally, you hit a problem like, the problem of buying insurance, where actually it's a very complicated problem. And your intuitions aren't right, but you don't know it. So
So you don't know when your intuition... So that's the crucial reason that you need to know when to use System 2, because...
You need to recognize this is a situation
which requires...
where I'm prone to error. This is a situation...
Now, how do you discover that?
It's very hard to do, and I'm not terribly optimistic about people, becoming very good at it. But there are certain principles that, you can learn to recognize. So, for example, I know about myself that I'm wildly overconfident. When I have opinions, I'm sure they're right. But I have had enough experience to know that I am overconfident. So the feeling of overconfidence is there. But if it matters, I can slow myself down and become more reasonable. So that's a case where System 1 would make you very confident, and System 2 slows you down.
How does it work, and you referenced this, how does it work in terms of people knowing what someone expects, so therefore they feed them that kind of information, and therefore the people at the end of the recipients of the information make bad decisions?
Well...
the Iraqi War is Exhibit 1 on this.
Yeah. What is happening is, and that happens a great deal, is that people are convinced. And it's not that people go to war because of reasons. It really very often works the other way around.
We go to
people
war because
want to go to war, and then they find the reasons. So if System 1 is very engaged, and there is a strong intuition that war is needed, that war is right, and so on, then System 2 is become the slave of System 1. And that happens a great deal.
You credit Bush 43, President Bush 43, as a clear example of a System 1 person.
Well, I may have mentioned that, yes. I mean,
well, yes,
I probably cited somebody else who said that, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
But
I mean, clearly, when somebody
he's a man who
tells...
operated by intuition. His instincts, his gut was what guided him, and he said that essentially.
Yeah, he was proud of it. I mean, so he was a man who was saying, I trust my gut, and that's how I got to where I am. And so, yes, he was definitely...
So he became overconfident about his gut.
Well, I think most people who trust their gut are overconfident about their guts in important matters, but he clearly was.
And President Obama, you say, is clearly a System 2 person.
Well, yeah, he may be at the other extreme. I mean, and that may be part of
too much.
That may be part of his political difficulties, because the public has a stereotype of what makes a strong leader. And they like leaders who are decisive. They like leaders who operate quickly. And they don't like leaders who take time.
And they like leaders who seem to think.
And they like leaders who seem to know exactly what they're going to do. And, you know, we attribute magic to intuition. So when things work out as planned, then, you know...
So could a subtitle of this book be Intuition is Way Overvalued?
Well, I prefer as a subtitle Intuition, the Marvels and the Flaws, because the marvels, which I don't speak about much because they're less interesting than the flaws, the marvels are, you know, how much we do with intuition and how good our intuitions are. You know, so I'll give you some examples. You can drive without thinking about it. You know, that's the same machinery that does intuition. I can tell you a sentence. You know, one of my favorite experiments is people listen to sentences, and a British upper-class male voice says, and I'm not going to try
It's a great story.
So it says, I have large tattoos all down my back. And it takes about a third of a second, and the brain reacts with a surprise. Now that's extraordinary. You know, you have to figure out...
A man with a deep British voice would not have tattoos.
That's right. But, you know, the amount of world knowledge that has to be brought to bear on that problem within a third of a second for the brain to recognize that there is an incongruity, this is extraordinary. So, and intuition is like that, so that a chess player will recognize a chess situation very quickly. I recognize my wife's mood one word on the telephone.
You can say, so you say what's wrong. Are you okay?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
you can hear it.
And that you can hear it. All it takes is a lot of practice.
Take us to the realm of traders, people who we think have enormous instincts.
You know, there is a debate about where intuition does and does not work in financial markets. So I'm on pretty safe ground when I say that in the stock market, in picking individual stocks, you know, traders...
It's all the numbers.
It's luck. I mean, you know, they're playing a game of luck. They feel they're playing a game of skill, but most of them are playing a game of luck.
You can do all the System 2 you want. It will not tell you what you need to know.
Because,
it's just luck.
And that is not anybody's fault, you know. It's the same thing with pundits trying to predict what's going to be the state of the United States or of China in 15 years. Pundits are no better at it than readers of the New York Times.
Why not? I mean, doesn't history matter? Doesn't
because
empirical data matter?
Well, in some cases it does, in others it doesn't.
So if you know the difference?
Yes, we do know actually. I mean, we know that the stock market is chaotic, is extremely complicated. And it doesn't have enough regularity for people to learn.
So what about all these people who've made billions and billions of dollars every year because they put these very smart mathematical models in silos, and those silos tell them the way the market's going to operate, and then they make...
what those mathematical models are doing, they're not picking individual stocks. They're picking up trends. And some of these are micro trends and some of these are macro trends. And, you know, they're able to, if you're able to predict what the market will do in the next 5 seconds, you can become very rich doing that.
Right.
And so a lot of these work on programs that are in effect, you know, it's no longer
But let me take
intuition,
2 examples of that. I'll give you 2 examples of people who made a lot of money because they made huge bets. One was George Soros betting on the British currency. And the other was John Paulson betting on the subprime.
Yeah. Well, they're both very interesting examples. I mean, I would never sell George Soros. He operates, and his big bets are on an understanding of the world economy and of trends, and and an ability, he claims, to anticipate how people will react to these trends.
Anticipate, that's your game. That is your business that he says he understands, how people will react.
Will react. That's
your business, not an economic model.
He claims he can do it. And, you know,
his
and
track
he
record
has
speaks for itself, as they
track
say.
record
He's
very, very good. Paulson, you know, I mean, at least in some of the trades that we know about, I mean, he was shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, it's not.
Oh yes, that's
so,
true. He was shooting fish.
That is not. Some of the great successes are because people who are already billionaires and have a lot of control.
And then he's had a rough plodding for a while.
Yes,
and
they have a lot more.
Big year, and then came back and had a not so big year.
Yeah, they have a lot more information than other people.
If you're so smart, you win all the time, as maybe we should say.
Well,
and history proves that that's not true.
I don't think that winning a few times proves that you're smart, and losing a few times doesn't prove that you have to look at the world. And as you have to ask whether the world actually affords enough regularity so that it becomes learnable. So
and
that
your answer is?
My answer is, in some cases, like chess or my wife's moods or, you know, many other problems that people solve, the answer is yes. And in the stock market and in long-term forecasting and sometimes even in medium-term forecasting as in wars, the answer is no.
So what's the difference in long-term forecasting and chess?
Well, in chess, there are regularities. So you can predict what's going to happen. If you know where you are now, you can predict what's going to happen next. And that is how people develop intuitions. You know, that's how people learn to read. So chess and reading have a lot in common. You recognize situations and, you know, snap diagnoses by medical experts. There are regularities, they pick them up. They learn those regularities. When there are no regularities, I would say, forget it. It's not going to happen.
Now, Michael Lewis wrote a profile of you for Vanity Fair.
Indeed.
What was the story?
Well, Michael Lewis wrote Moneyball, and he wrote Moneyball about Billy Beane, who was, you know, that man in...
Now a movie.
And, you know, beautiful movie.
Yeah.
And so he did that. Now, that book was reviewed by a couple of friends of mine who are, you know, well-known behavioral economists. I mean, Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein.
Right.
They reviewed Michael's book for the New Republic.
Right.
And they said, Michael wrote that magnificent piece. He doesn't seem to know that a lot of that is known to psychologists. That actually, if you apply a mechanical or statistical system to prediction, you will do better than what is called clinical prediction. So an algorithm will beat scouts. If you give decent information to both, the algorithm will use the information better than the scouts will. And so that got...
So, but if that's true, then why hasn't it proven to be true since... Or have other people adopted it and therefore it's being used smartly? So in other words, the algorithm that was being used by Billy Beane's team at the Oklahoma A's is being used by many people today.
You know, if you remember the end of the film, he
didn't go to Boston.
He didn't go to Boston, but Boston adopted his system, and they won. They won the pennant 2 years later. So the game has changed.
I'm going to read some things here that are interesting. Yeah. At the end of a basketball game, why does it make sense for the last shot to go to the player with the best overall shooting percentage, not the player with the hot hand? Because a lot of people say, if you've got a player with a hot hand, you want him to take the last shot. You say no, you want...
Yeah. Well,
who do you want to shoot the last shot?
I definitely want to, you know, the player who is the most reliable player should have the last shot, period.
Hot hand does not matter.
The hot hand, you know, to the best as we know, the hot hand doesn't exist, so it's an illusion. People feel that there is a hot hand.
When they can see the basket looks like it's as big as a...
Yeah, and they can, you know, they can feel it, and furthermore, the player feels it, and everybody feels it. But it's a shared illusion, and actually, you know, we know how this works, because if you have a grid, a 10 by 10 grid, and then you sprinkle red color on the grid, and you do that randomly. When you do it randomly, it will not appear random. For a grid to appear random, it has to be somewhat systematic. That's what we know. And the hot hand is one of those phenomena.
Now, here's another example. All of these are in the book. When shoppers for Campbell's Soup see a sign reading limit of 12 per person, they buy an average of 7 cans, twice as many as they bought when there was no sign.
Well, that is a phenomenon that we call anchoring.
Yes,
and
the anchor effect.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest and most robust phenomena there are. I mean, you know, you can, any number that you think about as a solution to a problem, you're going to be affected by it. I mean, they had that study of German judges who tossed a pair of dice.
Oh, right, and they were
And
loaded.
then they had to judge how many months somebody, shoplifter, I think, would go to jail.
Right.
And they were strongly influenced by the number that the dice showed. That's an anchoring effect. And we understand it, and we know how it happens, and it's very powerful.
Are behavioral economists on the rise?
No question. I mean, the behavior economics now is a major input into policies.
Right.
That's
Economic policies,
economic
political policies, foreign policy decisions,
regulation is very strongly informed by behavior economics. So Cass Sunstein, who is the chief regulator, he wrote a book with Richard Thaler, who is the guru of behavior economics. They wrote Nudge together. So definitely.
Explain Nudge.
Nudge is the idea that you can help people make good decisions without forcing them to make any particular decision. For example, you know, the most dramatic example is organ donation. So there are countries in Europe where the default is that you don't donate your organ. But when you get your driver's license, there is a box which says if you want to donate your organ, check that box. There are other countries where the default is reversed. You donate your organs. But
you have to choose not to.
Yes, you have to opt out in order. Now, the proportion of donations is about 94%, if I recall, in one group of countries and 18% in the other. So the effect of default options is enormous. Now, people are completely free to choose. But, you know, one of these choices is much better than the other.
Who comes to you and pays you lots of money to consult with them? What kinds of people?
Well, not many people come to me personally to consult with me.
But
you know, quite a few people are curious about it. But there is actually enormous resistance, I think, within organizations to implementing programs that would improve the rationality of their decisions.
Why?
Well, because it creates difficulties for the leadership. The moment you have a system that is a more, structured system, then that system can be used to second-guess the decisions of people. And people don't like to be second-guessed. So that there is a lot of interest in ways to improve rationality. But I have not found, I've been invited to many places and given many talks and been very well received. When it comes to implementation, enthusiasm wanes distinctly.
Because of some instinct for security?
Because...
Or you don't want to be found out.
Idea,
you don't want to be found out.
You are naked.
Yes.
And this is a real problem. This is a real problem. So how to promote rationality within organizations, how to prevent mistakes, that takes, sort of architecture.
It takes that, and it takes a mindset to say, I am going to insist on rationality.
Yes, and without...
And you will be naked, and we will, you have to defend your
I'm going to
ideas.
insist on rationality, but I'm not going to allow paralysis.
Yeah.
So you'll have to decide. I'm going to look for the proper mix of intuition and reasoning. It's a complicated process, very difficult, and very few people have done it, very systematically. Some firms have, actually.
Some,
there are hedge funds, venture capitalists,
right.
who have a systematic process to optimize their decision-making. And
they've done better than others.
And I think they do very well.
Yes, I do too. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, that was the example that I was thinking about.
Yeah. this
when I brought it up.
because they are not working in a perfect market.
Right.
You know, there are actually opportunities for them. And so there, a good process will in general, make them thrive.
Yeah. What question do you not know the answer to that you most want to understand?
Well, you know, for the last few years I've been studying well-being.
Well-being.
Yes. And the question that I would most like to understand, and there seem to be two facets to well-being. One is, what is your mood in real time? And the other is, how satisfied are you with your life when you think about it? Both are very important. It's clear that both are very important. They're not the same. So we know what causes one, we know what causes the other.
Okay, repeat that to me, because I really want to understand it. So the first one is
how happy you are in real time. What's your mood like?
Right, exactly.
You know, are you interested? Are you aware? Are you vital? You know, you feel energy. The other one is, when you think about your life, how satisfied are you with your life?
Yeah.
Turns out those two are very different.
And so what do you want to understand?
What I would like to know is which of them has the bigger effect on health. So if you asked me, you know, what question I would like to know before I totally quit, that question is one.
And what does your intuition tell you?
I don't know. I don't trust my intuition.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there are so many surprising results here that my intuition is not useful.
Everything you've learned just told you not to trust intuition.
Well, yes, not to trust it.
So what did you think of that
far.
book Malcolm Gladwell wrote called Blink?
Well, Malcolm Gladwell actually does not believe that intuition is magic. He really doesn't believe it. It's very clear he has chapters where he shows, for example, he has a chapter on why President Harding was elected, just because he looked the part. So intuition is not always a winner. But Malcolm Gladwell definitely created in the public of readers the impression that intuition is magical.
Mm.
And that, I think, that I regret. You know, I have enormous respect for Malcolm Gladwell. You know, his piece is always the first one that I read when it's in the New Yorker.
Right.
But here, his story has helped people in a belief they want to have, which is that intuition works magically. And that belief is false.
Thinking fast and slow, Daniel Kahneman. I thank you, and I'm honored to meet you.
Thank you very much.